Right, before we hear from our final speaker for the evening, I'd just like to make you all aware that we did invite representation from all the major parties in the area. We did invite representatives from the Conservatives, the Dems, the Green Party and the Labour Party. We're fortunate enough to have a representative from the Labour Party here. I'm afraid nobody else is here. So
When I first agreed to speak this evening, it was on the basis that I was going to be here with Tories and Lib Dems, and I was thinking, well, you know, it's a fairly horrendous agenda to talk about for any politician, but I'm not going to be the really bad guy in the room. And I'm conscious that I am now the bad guy in the room, so I accept that. I'll do a bit about who I am, I suppose. Sarah Russell, I'm a City Councillor. I'm not going to talk about the 0 to 19 review for the simple reason, and I can give you a couple of key facts and figures on it, but I had to step back from the decision-making process because my mum sits on the board of Shore Start in the county and was mentoring somebody in the city, and it got messy in terms of declarations of interest, so I stepped back from that process, although I can still talk about some of the facts and figures around it and some of the significant cuts that the council has taken in that area. My patch that I was elected to represent is West Coast. It's the area around Norble Road. It's a fairly deprived area of the city. It's not as deprived as some areas, but we've got an incredible turnover of population. Our population changes, our people registered on our electoral roll changes 50% every year. So in terms of a community where services and access to services are important, and access to welfare law service and access to free service, access to schools, to children's centres, to specialist services is really important because people don't get the information quickly enough, they move on and we've lost them. So that's the patch that I serve, it's the patch that I live in, and the reason I stood as a local councillor was because I wanted to make stuff better for people. I wanted to make stuff better for the community I live in. I wanted to help change things. I was elected about 6 years ago. I've served on the City Cabinet now for 3.5, nearly 4 years. I started off doing environmental sustainability, and my portfolio now is neighbourhoods. The best way to describe my portfolio is whatever doesn't fit into adults, children or culture is mine. Or transport. I've not got transport either. Pretty much everything else, in one way or another, I'm responsible for. So that's cleaning the streets, recycling, community services, welfare benefits, welfare law advice, IT, libraries, enforcement services, environmental health, you name it. The things that people think of as things the council provide, if they're not specifically for adults or children, then they're usually for me. I still love the job I've got. Oh, I should have said, particularly given that I'm also standing another election, community safety, policing, social behaviour, and a whole raft of other services. It's been a long week already. I do love the job I've got. You do still get the opportunity to change things, to make things better. But the vast majority of what we do now is trying to stop things getting worse. We've got £70 million we have to take out of the council's budget in 3 years. As soon as the coalition government came in, they put an in-year funding cut, and about 6 million straight away, and it went up to about 20 very quickly. Nobody could remember in-year funding cuts. It doesn't happen. It didn't happen. We've got people who've worked at the council since they left school and who are now well past the traditional retirement age, and they couldn't remember ever having in-year funding cuts. So everybody's had to adapt fairly quickly to us constantly looking at what can we cut, what can we save, what can we protect. It isn't pleasant. It's not something any of us got into it to do. It's not something any of us relish. Budget meetings and going through the budget process is a fairly sickening procedure. It's the only way I can put it. It is about trying to get the least worst options. I'm going to kind of take it to the big picture and talk about what is going on nationally, because we've heard some of the really specific local examples. But the topic for tonight was protecting women from the cuts, and I don't see how we can when they're the scale they are. Comprehensive spending review 2 years ago, it hit women far worse than it hit men. It hit them over housing benefit, it hit them over tax rates, it hit them over childcare, it hit people over employment, it hit people over health, it hit people over education. There was no stone left unturned. There's changes that come through, policy changes that come through on a regular basis, and every one of them seems to hit women. Some of them don't on the face of it. Things like taking away the sports partnership money for schools. You'd think that wasn't going to directly impact more on women than it will on men, but the types of activities that schools have had to stop doing and that the government are now saying they absolutely have to stop doing are the things that actually kept particularly our teenage girls exercising. They're the things that stopped them being put off sport and a healthy lifestyle. So not just having to do a competitive game of netball and rugby and hockey, but having the opportunity to do dancing, to use theatre in an active way, to do all sorts of other things, to do cycling, to do aerobics. It didn't matter, but it gave people a range of opportunities that actually got them interested in an active lifestyle. So all the studies show that that will impact far worse on girls and their ongoing lifestyle than it will on the male members of our society. It's not the only place our young women are going to be hit. Our young women are going to be hit with the education changes. The E-back, I think it's been called, hasn't it? What that is going back to a system that we know significantly favoured boys' education over girls. The style of it, the type of learning, all the statistics show that that system will favour boys over girls. So we are looking at generational impact on our young people, specifically upon our young women. Then we're looking at health impacts. Now the health impacts aren't just on our young women, we've talked, I said about them in sports, but you look at the health impacts going right the way across our population, and you look at people not being able to afford to heat their houses. We know that in families, if the food budget's cut, then women give themselves less and make sure that everybody else has got enough. It's something we seem to do instinctively. All these different things ratchet up. Then they ratchet up with not being able to get to see your GP or having to wait longer to be able to go to the hospital. It's really interesting. You go back 5 years, and I was as grumpy about the Labour government as most people, I'll admit. You know, it was really hard often to pin down what the difference was. My nana fell over and broke her hip about 4 years ago. She was in hospital. She was able to get seen straight away. She was able to get rehabilitation afterwards. She then had follow-up appointments. My uncle had got a problem with his heart at the same time, and he got seen the following week. He was able to go to a primary care centre and get the treatment he needed. A neighbour fell last week, and they've said, well, we can treat you, but we've got to send you home straight away because we're going to get fined for the beds. And we've not got, she lives up in the Lake District, it's not a local example, we've not got any money for adaptions at the moment, so you're just going to have to manage. And another friend of hers, another heart operation, and they said, oh, actually, the waiting list, we've not got any money for those operations because it's not an urgent one anymore, so you've got to wait till next financial year. And those things are happening day in, day out. They're not things that we didn't see them every day, but they did happen. Waiting lists did change and people did get access to healthcare. Not everyone, it wasn't perfect, but things were starting to change. I feel like that's all been undone in 2 years. And that part of you makes you wonder what's the point. If you can put all that money into investment and in 2 years it can be taken away and the social consequences destroyed, but it's got to be built up again. It's got to be fought for, it's got to be worked on, it's got to be, you've got to go back and start again and go, okay, what do we do differently, you know? I think the Labour government spent far too much on capital projects. We built too many things. It was the right thing to do to try and get the economy going, but actually some buildings could have been used in different ways. We could have thought about things differently. It's beauty of hindsight, but we have to look and be realistic about how we have to do it again. I'm going to move on to the cuts, specifically around welfare. For the housing benefit changes, the universal tax credit changes, the council tax benefit changes, people in our city, in fact people across the country, are going to be screwed. And that's the best way I can put it. I can dress it up in fancy language, but it won't make any difference. Council tax benefit is one of the responsibilities I've got. And the government have changed it from people automatically getting council tax benefit if they fall within certain groups. Pensioners, people with disability living allowance, lone parents, and parents with children under 5, sufferers of domestic violence, war widows, a whole range of groups that were given support towards their council tax bills to just make life that little bit more manageable. What the government have done is said, no, we're going to localise it. Now, I don't know about anybody else, every time somebody says the word localism, I get another sort of cold icicle through me, because the only thing I can see out of localism is let's make it somebody else's responsibility to cut this. And that is what's happening. So, council tax benefit, what they've said is, well, we'll give the money to local councils and they can decide how to spend it. Which sounds all well and good, apart from the fact that for Leicester they've taken £7 million out of it. That means that all the support that we offered people previously, that happened automatically, is now going to be nigh on impossible to do, unless we cut from somewhere else. We've already dealing with the 70 million cuts and the cuts to the early intervention grant and the cuts to all the other separate pots of money that we had coming in. So we're consulting at the moment, and one of the things I'm going to find on here and show you, the way we look at doing consultations, and they're not perfect, but we have to do what's called an equalities impact assessment. We have to look at them and say, any budget decisions, any service changes, we have to look at and we have to say, okay, protected characteristics under the Equalities Act, age, disability, gender reassignment, pregnancy and maternity, race, religion or belief, sex and sexual orientation. We have to see whether there are significant differential impacts on those groups and whether we are doing things to mitigate against them. So, for the council tax support, we had a look at the REIAs. Let's see if I can pull my documents up while we're talking. And I'm going to read you. I'll just read you one of them. They're quite long. I'm quite happy to share them with other people afterwards. We've got them, flicking through on here, we've got them for Mary, a lone parent with a child under 5 and 4 other children, one of whom's over 18. I can read that one. I'm going to let you choose which one I read. I could look at Hussein, single managed 23. We could look at Michael, a single managed 30. All these people are going to get hit. We can look at Leo, is another single male. I don't want another single male. There'll have been a difference in them. That Helen, a lone parent, aged 21. Mohammed and Asma, married and 4 children. All these people are going to get hit. Mr. and Mrs. Patel are pensioners. They won't get hit because the government's protected pensioners in this particular one. Because pensioners vote. That's simply why it is. I know it sounds really cynical, and I'm feeling a bit cynical this evening discussing this, and that is the reality, is that certain groups will get better protected because they vote more. I can go through all of them. I'll read about our single parent, shall I?
Helen.
Oh, Helen, was Helen the first one or the third one?
Yeah,
first one. Oh, Helen was 21, she was the third one. Let me pull up Helen. Mary was the first one. Let me see. Let's read about Helen then. Okay, and we've got them pulled out. So, Helen's a lone parent, age 20. These are real examples, by the way. We've changed the names, obviously. Helen's a lone parent, age 21, with a child aged 10 months. She lives in a 2-bedroom flat in New Parks. Helen receives the following benefits: housing benefit, council tax benefit, income support, child benefit, child tax credits and child maintenance on an ad hoc basis. Welfare reforms that have affected her household income, council tax support if she isn't protected, RPI to CPI, and I'll remember what that is in a second. There's too many acronyms in my head at the moment. Local housing allowance rate changes from the 50th to the 30th percentile. Another local housing allowance one. Child benefit rates being fixed for 3 years. Cuts in Sure Start funding. Health in pregnancy grant going £190 a year. Child trust fund going. Sure Start maternity grant. Baby rate tax credits. The free nursery places having their hours restricted. The working tax credit scheme. Utility bills have gone up. Her food bills have gone up. Helen is living hand to mouth. Any sudden calls on her income could move her into debt. She's aware that food banks exist and has heard of Fair Share. It's only available 1 day a week though. She's read about a case, she's read an article on the Trussell Trust. There isn't one in Leicester. One's being set up in Colville and there is one in Hinckley, but the travel costs are too high. She's a bit ashamed to use these services, but a friend has used them and she feels more comfortable. And when she gets some money, she hopes to donate herself. But the unreliability of her maintenance payments means she's got no idea when that's going to happen. So, she's on the brink of debt, her mental health and her well-being are in peril. And she's got to find where the help and advice are from. I'm going to just read you what's going to happen in terms of the changes. This is somebody else's document I'm reading from because I get countless ones of these, but across the piece it illustrates it. So, we've said what she's in receipt of. She lives in a council-rented flat in New Parks and she gets £5 a week from her ex-partner through direct deductions from his job seekers allowance fund with CSA. However, it depends on him signing on. She left her ex-partner after suffering from domestic violence while she was pregnant with her son. She was in a specialist council hostel for women for 3 months and then housed by the council 2 weeks before her son was born. She's had help from the STAR team and the domestic violence support. Helen's total weekly benefit income is £210.54. Once she's paid her rent and council tax, this is reduced to £129.65 a week. She has nothing left at the end of each week once she pays for their food, electricity, gas, water, sewage rates and TV licence. Over the past 12 months, she's noticed the increase in the cost of food. The quality of food I can afford has gone down. This has resulted in us not eating as well as we should. She's seen an increase in church aid and food parcels and she picked up a leaflet at a library on food support that she's going to look into. Nappies are expensive and her son's quickly growing out of his clothes. She sells his old clothes at a car boot sale and uses the money to buy new clothes at the charity shops. Shoes are expensive for children. She spends a lot of time shopping around for bargains. She's concerned about the cost of heating this winter. Last winter she regularly monitored her gas meter and often switched the gas off and got into bed to keep warm. This was not a good thing in regard to her mental health. She uses the council's library service to borrow books for her son. She also uses the children's centre in New Parks. She uses the council's swimming pool when they offer free sessions and she's hoping to use the free 15 hours of nursery education when her son is old enough, which she's heard about again at the children's centre. But 15 hours isn't enough to work, so she says she'll use the time to study part-time. When advised about the changes to council tax benefit from April 2013 and the fact that she might have to contribute, she states she simply doesn't have any spare money. When explained the consequences of non-payment, she can't see the point of the government wanting to get her into debt with the bailiffs. She needs a washing machine and television, which she's still paying for, or the sense of committing her to prison with a small child. Wouldn't it cost more and make less sense for the state to look after her child? If she had to afford it, she states she would have to cut back even more, but where? She simply can't see she has any choices if she wants to keep herself and her son mentally and physically healthy. And that's the sort of decision we're having to make. It's not about the big figures, it's not about the millions of pounds here and the billions of pounds here. It's about people like Helen. And that's what we have to try and do as councillors, as part of the mayoral team. We have to try and remind ourselves about each individual person. But they have to come. We have to put a balanced budget in. We're not like the government. The government are allowed to borrow money. The government are allowed to say it will increase debt this year. We can print more money. If councils decide to set an unbalanced budget, a budget that puts us into debt, which a number of us talked about last year because the cuts were so severe, we can get sent to prison. And people will send us to prison. And people got sent to prison. Yeah, it is, and you know, the government in the 80s put in the legislation exactly so we don't do it. realistically, they wouldn't send us to prison. What they'd do is give it over to our officers. Now, okay, I quite trust our senior team. We've got a fairly decent senior team with good values in there in most places. I'm not going to talk about every single person's values, but in the main. But they'd still have to make the cuts. There isn't a choice, and the point of democracy is that you elect people who hopefully you trust to be able to make them, and people in the city have elected us, and all I can say is we're trying to not make it any worse. We're trying to make sure that the places we cut from, that we don't try and make the cuts worse that have been made nationally, that we protect things like welfare law advice services, that we protect things like the funding that we spend on healthcare, the funding we spend on trying to keep some of our statutory services open, that we make sure we don't close libraries where people are able to access the information to try and make things a bit better. But we can't protect everyone. In fact, we can't protect most people, and things are only going to get worse. It's a really, really dull and sour note to end on. But we have about once a month, if not more frequently now, because we're getting into the budget time again, our senior financial officers will come and brief our cabinet. And previously, they've been a bit dour about expectations, and this bit might go here and this bit might go there. The next 2 years, we know roughly what we're going to take out, but the government are likely to bring the comprehensive spending review forward a year. And when they do that, they're likely to take far more out. And they've promised they won't take it out of health, although they are doing, because they're not giving in real time, and not giving cash increases. And they're fairly wary about cutting from the armed services, because that's where their votes come from. And they're already cutting from the police. They're already cutting from, in fact, most of the budgets. But local government, they go, oh, nobody really cares about local government. Not much happens at local government. You don't get any votes about giving money to local government. But you get quite a lot of votes in the Tory shires about saying to people, we're cutting waste, cutting council bureaucracy. And the reality is that people like me end up having to make fairly grim decisions. That wasn't why I got elected to do this in the first place. But that's where we are. So tonight I am the bad guy, because I'm here and I'm the statutory person that's here, but it ain't easy.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for your honesty about the situation that everybody is facing. I don't think anyone's under any illusions about exactly what's going on.